This gentleman really doesn't need a whole lot of introduction. He's about one of the most popular astrologers in the country right now. He is a full-time professional, as I said, from Seattle. And we're real happy to have Jeff Green here this morning, and his lecture is going to be on Pluto, the Evolutionary Journey of the Soul.
Thank you. Good morning. Awake and ready? Yes. Good. Okay, first, for those who have studied the Pluto book that was written on this here topic, this is going to be a workshop in which you can ask me the questions you may have that has come out of that book. So the bottom line is that during a workshop you can ask me anything you want concerning the material that we cover today, as well as, you know, as you're reading the book going, hey, what's this mean? So you can ask me, and don't be shy from asking those questions. I mean, most of us in America have been conditioned to be shy and or timid. So don't do that, because it's really your time. I mean, I've covered this material long enough over many years, and so it's really your time, eh? So what this material deals with is that question that many people ask: why am I here, and what are my lessons? For those that are doing counseling astrology, you will have noticed over the last 4 to 5 years that there has been an increase in the clientele that has been asking these questions. Many people are becoming socially alienated because the existing social structure is beginning to collapse. So all the mythologies and social models that many people have bought into aren't working. So more and more people are asking these questions. And so from an astrological point of view, there is a way to answer it. And that's exactly what this material is for. Because what these questions imply are the evolutionary nature of our life. And at a deeper level, life to life. Now when you deal with this issue of reincarnation, or life to life, or the progressive journey of the soul, or the transmigration of the soul, whatever you want to call it, please remember it's only been in the last few centuries in the West that this natural law has been doubted and or questioned. Even today, 2/3 of the planet, the population, still has such a belief structure. It has been the most prevailing belief structure throughout history. So if you want to talk about something that can be classified as a norm, who do you think really is in the minority? But the great thing is that, in other words, if you're conformity orientated, why not conform to this norm? You understand my point? So the great news is that you don't have to take it on belief either. It can in fact be proven. How? Let's take a nature of a word that exists in all language. All languages. And let's just focus on one word called growth. A word describes a process or a phenomenon. So, the bottom line, if we only have one life, if it's just one time around, why grow? For what purpose? What's the intent? Why would people feel that they have something that they learn behind any given experience? For what purpose? So my point is that words describe process. What process are we describing? In addition, when you deal with the nature of the soul, because most of you have, most of us have been exposed to this word, it exists again in many languages, many races, over vast amounts of time. But what in reality is a soul? Can we give it a descriptive quality? Again, a word describes a something, It describes some sort of phenomena. So what is this word soul describing? Just to put us on common footing, let's perhaps try to agree on a simple definition. Let's try and call it an immutable consciousness. Immutable meaning it cannot be destroyed. That has its own inherent individualized structure. Now, a soul has a structure. That has its own eternal identity. An example of this phenomena would be Seth. I.e. Seth speaking through an entity named James Roberts. Who's doing the speaking? Seth. From a soul point of view. Meaning that soul has that name. In effect, you have a egocentric structure within the soul itself. That's its own word, is it not? Ego. That of itself describes a phenomena, does it not? And we have all grown up in a culture, at least within the last 20 years or so, in which for those who have attempted to spiritualize, you have learned this thought to get rid of your ego. Well, for those that have struggled, you find out it's not possible. So what does that mean? I mean, we can't surgically open the brain and remove the ego. You can't even find it. You can't find thought, nor can you find consciousness. And yet it exists. For those that studied, excuse me, but you know, the early part of the lecture I'll probably just ramble here because it is 6 in the morning for me. So if you don't mind digressions. But you know, the Buddhists have a happy little saying called the causeless cause, or the formless form. If you really want to understand the nature of this truth, meditate on the nature of thought. It exists, but you can't find it. You can't open the brain and drag out a thought. So clearly it's a formless form. But anyway, the ego, what is it? Let's just use the happy analogy of a movie projector. And imagine now that you have a film thing, reel of film. And you've got a screen. If you don't have a lens, are you going to see the images on the film? Similarly, the ego of the soul and the personality that it manifests are focusing agents within consciousness. From a purely energy point of view, it's a vortex that creates an image of oneself. And is necessary. It cannot be removed. It's an inherent structure of consciousness. Even if you take your greatest of the great, the Jesuses, the Moseses, the Buddhas, they could not even utter their own name, without an egocentric structure to create the name. So the issue is not getting rid of the ego, so to speak. It's ultimately, the issue metaphysically is to align it, unify it, with a higher will and a higher ego, and you can call that God. This is the true meaning of those words, getting rid of the ego, in a sense of just identifying with it subjectively. So really what you have here is a mistranslation from Eastern literature to West. So the soul has an inherent structure. It's an immutable consciousness. It has its own identity. And it cannot be destroyed. Now, we could ask the following big question. Why was the soul created? In the first place. And who created it? What created it? And for what purpose? And this is where you start getting into the nature of religions, don't you? Oh, God. So, we'll leave that for you to ponder. What we do know is that it exists. Now, the only thing I would say about that, especially for you Virgos, just meditate on the nature and origin of imperfection. The origin. Meaning, if you accept the belief that what you call God or the source created everything, wherein lies the origin of imperfection. The point here is that if the Creator was perfect in the beginning, there would be no need to create.
Your logos is stuttering.
Aye. This is not working. Oh well.
All this meditating on imperfection,
I guess so. Overload the circuits or something. So my point is that if that what is called the Creator is perfect in the beginning, there would be no need to create anything. But also try and keep in mind this following fact, and which is the basis of evolution, by the way. The interface between imperfection and perfection. And again, I ask you the question, wherein lies the origin of this issue? It exists because it exists. We can observe it, we feel it, we experience it. That cannot be doubted. So my big metaphysical question to you and myself is, wherein lies the origin of this issue? Because it always exists. After your body dies and mine dies, it still exists. It exists in the next person, the next person, the next person. But try and remember that, you know, if we use the analogy, let's use, imagine now, water. And let's, if I pour water into this cup, is not that water going to reflect the nature and structure of this cup versus the inherentness of the totality of the water? Similarly, when you take the phenomena of consciousness and you pour it into the inherent structure of human consciousness, it can only understand the truths that that consciousness is capable of understanding. It reflects it. That's why you have all these personified images of God and the goddess, reflecting human form. But my point to you is this: what if we lived on some planet in the Pleiades? And the nature of creation there relative to consciousness was different. Would not their pantheon of God and goddesses reflect that? Or do you think it's going to reflect our image? So, didn't I say my point? So, if we deal with the nature of the soul, what you have relative to this interface between perfection and imperfection is the linkage to desire. Desire. The desire to perfect. The desire to be perfect. The desire to eliminate imperfection. / growth. / evolution. We can all, again, don't take this on faith, we can prove it right now. Is it not true? Because look, the evolution of the soul in the end is based on the elimination, the progressive elimination of imperfect / separating desires. Separating from what? That which created the soul, whatever that may be. And so you have this inner dynamic in the soul, one desire to separate, one desire to return, which is, in fact, the basis of what a psychologist would call free choice, and or what an esoterist will call karma, meaning that which you desire must translate into an action. And relative to Newton's observation of gravity, cause and effect, you have a reaction, which is equal or proportionate to the action. This we can see. So, to prove it, is it not true that any of us can have whatever separating desire, the new sofa, the new lover, the new position, and we might have the ability to obtain what we desire, and we might have a temporary sense of satisfaction, eh? But what replaces it? Is it not dissatisfaction, the sense of something more? Yes or no? Yes. This is a perfect empirical proving of this simple law. It's not their hypothesis, you've just validated it yourself through your life, as all peoples have for all time. So, you have the nature then of the evolution of the soul, the progressive elimination of separating desire. It is the very basis of Buddha's enlightenment underneath the Bodhi tree, as he pondered the nature of sorrow, misery, pain. His conclusion, desire, was the basis of. If you just take a look at the nature of our world now, and you focus upon the nature of separating desire, now manifesting through the subjective ego, now that Pluto's in Scorpio, don't you see, just as a simple example, because this transit now is squaring the Pluto and Leo people. And this is the generation that has now become the yuppies. Scorpio. And what you have there is, I'm going to get mine, Leo, while I can, Scorpio. You understand my point? And of course, a lot of these folks back in the 60s were the hippies. So what kind of metamorphosis? Scorpio. Does this imply from a hippie lifestyle value system, thank you, to to a yuppie? You see my point? So, the nature of the soul is to evolve through time-space. And there are two kinds of evolution that, again, we can empirically prove and observe. There is cataclysmic evolution, as in an earthquake, a volcano, Watergate, Iran-gate, Pluto transiting Venus. No. Or the slow yet progressive evolution, as in Darwin's notion of uniformity, the theory of uniformity. Cataclysmic evolution occurs for two reasons. Either through personal or collective resistance to what is needed, evolutionarily speaking, from the point of view of change. In effect, resisting necessary change. The reason that what would be the basis of the resistance? What for? The Pluto question is why? Because that's what constitutes one's immediate reality, individually or collectively, is formulated from that which has come before, the past, which has led to this moment even as we're speaking. And thus security. It's a known quantity. It is familiar. I can control it. I know it. One of the central components to security in all human consciousness is the need for self-consistency. Thus, when your self-consistency is challenged, your security is challenged. If my immediate reality that I know and can control is challenged, I feel insecure. Thus I resist. If I resist for too long, relative to necessary change, cataclysm. The deeper force is not your resistance, it's evolutionary necessity. It's a principle of water returning to the sea. It will get there. So just as Nixon tried to resist what was happening around him, keeping in mind he has a 10th house Pluto, which was the resistance based on, it happened anyway, relative to evolutionary necessity. And keeping in mind that Watergate exactly happened when Pluto was transiting Nixon's south node, the past, coming to a head. Coincidence, synchronicity. And then you have, of course, a non-cataclysmic change, which is simply slow, progressive evolution. One thing evolving to another thing over a great amount of time. Now, oh, the other reason, by the way, for cataclysm, sorry, I'm spaced, is a result of karma, meaning some prior action equaling a reaction which is either happening now or has been deferred and is happening now. In other words, if I go out and kill somebody now, it's not fated that I myself get killed now. It can happen later, can it not? That's a deferred reaction. These are, again, things that just happen. It's life. It's not theory or hypothesis. My point is, how do you explain it? You all awake and ready? Is it too heavy or what?
I had a question.
Yes, sir.
I got stuck as I was trying to ponder this on one question. The cataclysmic aspect of that is involved in evolution is caused by a resistance to necessary change.
Yeah.
I perceive the soul as resisting change, as threatening a sense of annihilation to its sense of its own structure, its own nature. And if the soul wants to survive in its current structure, what causes its resistance to the annihilation of its form?
Oops. Thanks a lot. First of all, the structure of the soul will always survive.
But not in its form. Because
The form of the soul is constant.
That's where I have to grasp that, because I don't get it.
Well, it's based on the soul's the ultimate evolutionary journey of the soul is to return or merge or unify with that which created it.
I thought the soul was expressive of a particularized form of individuality.
No, the ego is. That's what you're mixing soul with ego / personality.
Okay.
The soul simply generates and or creates a personality that it needs. It's like a coat over a body. Generates a personality that it needs to accomplish its evolutionary intent in whatever life. Each personality is oriented to the universal in its own unique way. Thus its interpretation and experience of that reality is unique to itself. It's a classic example of something happening, 10 people observing it and having 10 interpretations of the same phenomenon. Personality. That's what changes.
Would the soul be more a sense of incompleteness that is striving to complete and heal itself then through taking on certain ego characteristics to fulfill it in that incarnation, in an evolutionary kind of pattern?
I got lost in that question there.
Well, I sense that if the soul doesn't have any characteristics of individual identity, in a sense, that's more of an ego, but the soul is an immortal, that doesn't add anything to the concept here, but if the soul has no particularized characteristics to it, but it's a more amorphous type of thing, and as I grasp the concept of soul, that it's an attempt at closure and completion of energy, and that the characteristics of the particular phase of this incarnation combines with an ego of a particular form in order to help the soul's closing and making more integrity for itself.
Well, it's got nothing to do with closure or integrity. It simply has everything to do with the fact that the soul did not generate itself. It did not create itself. It was created by another force. This is, in fact, the very origin of the Christian concept of original sin. The original sense of separation. What did I do wrong? And that's the origin of the guilt trip.
Well, the soul, as I see it, continues. If one of the fundamental characteristics of the soul is its persistence, then why is the soul persisting except for a sense of unfulfillment and a motivation of...
Because it comes back to this point of the past equaling the moment, equaling security. We are talking about experience through time and space. The soul is a consciousness. It's immutable. It has memories like personality has memory. It gets used to being separate. And keeping in mind that the soul has not created itself in the first place. Of itself, it's imperfect. So if it's had a series of lives over many, many centuries, generating experiences, memories, orientations, awarenesses, it gets used to it. If I get used to wearing the coat on my body that's making me warm, am I going to take it off? Nah. Wait. We have to... What?
My question is on the same.
What?
My question is on the same.
Go ahead.
Well, then, if you come into this present incarnation with this soul that has all kinds of past experiences,
Yeah.
you are carrying the past experiences with you into this present incarnation. How does this reflect or work with the ego?
It becomes the very basis of establishing that ego. All that which has come before, every bit of it contributes to the totality of your personality that the soul makes this time. Because that past, future, and the interface in each moment will be reflected consciously in the personality. How many of us are conscious of the soul?
The past lives of our soul?
Just the nature of it. To have your consciousness, the center of gravity of your consciousness, the point of awareness of your consciousness, centered in the soul.
You never thought of it?
Well, that's why you have mystical traditions. That's the nature of meditation. To do just that. And to break the over-identification with just a personality in this life. So what you have most of us can be aware of the soul by its effects, not the awareness of its causes. That's which is generating a particular motive, desire, intention, and so on. But we are aware of the effect. And that's how we can, in a echo-like way.
What makes us aware of the effect? The past,
Your life.
the present life.
Yes, if I have Pluto transiting my Venus, and I'm starting to experience the effect of my relationship degenerating, I'm aware of that effect. Am I not? Wherein is the origin of its cause? My soul is needing to grow, metamorphosize, and I'm experiencing limitations now, which is really to say limitations in myself. That I'm now projecting Venus through my relationship. I'm aware of this effect. Now, you see my point?
Now that's your ego. That's the effect.
The ego is conscious of that reality. Yeah.
First, this is like, we're playing with belief systems, but when you talked about God creating a spirit, I can't even phrase it right, but I guess what I want to say is God creates because God creates. That's his nature. And resistance is what causes us problems. We had a dilemma to we stop creating when we resist, or we create resistance.
Mm-hmm.
But you were talking about the interface between perfection and imperfection.
Yeah.
And God could never be perfect because that would be a static.
Not true.
Static.
What is called God itself evolves.
Right. Yeah, okay. So then all the soul does is take abstract thought and we live it. We manifest in physical realities to live out concepts that to the soul are unlivable.
No. No, because I understand where you're at. I mean, you're having a conflict between the natural order and all kinds of conditional thought sequences reflecting what is apparently called truth. And my point is, the whole nature of the soul and what your dilemma ultimately reflects is the need to unify with natural order, natural truth, not abstract. Because in the end, what you see, the natural order is very simple. It's what people call truth. In the end, the truth of the creation is incredibly simple. It's only when you start studying each particular point of creation that complexity occurs, which is the interface between Pisces Virgo. We are living now in the Virgo sub-age of the Piscean age. That's why you've had this incredible acceleration in technology and science and being able to look through the microscope to the point of seeing non-matter. Even the physicists have reached a point in their microscopes to where they can look so deeply into the nature of matter and or energy that there's no more cause. So that they themselves are making these statements, the causeless cause. Well, Buddhists said that, 4,000 years ago. So what you have here is the interface between the inner microscope, Pisces, and the Virgo microscope, and they're reflecting the same truth. But my point is that in the end, Pisces, it's simple. And it's only when you study the part within the total creation that you have complexity. And it's when you focus on the part that you make these abstracts. So, one more, yeah?
Do you have an explanation of why the source individuates the soul? Perhaps your point of...
Why the source created anything? It comes back to this point of imperfection. Beyond that, I don't know. Who could?
Well, this is my question. Do you?
Well, that comes back to my point of the water in the cup. Because only so much the consciousness and the human structure can grasp. And there is that which is not graspable and or knowable from the point of view of human consciousness. And so that the nature of the biggest question is unknowable with respect to So all you can do is describe phenomena and experience phenomena, and that which exists.
So there's something that is just accepted then.
To a limited extent, yes, it's true. But what you're accepting is the obvious.
But there isn't a why.
Huh?
Why?
The big why? That's like saying, what's the origin of the Big Bang?
Well, this is my question.
Wasn't the Buddha able to merge his consciousness? Wasn't that the point? To merge the consciousness with the wider consciousness?
Well, it's true.
Why, in a sense, the ego, and the personal ego is not disappeared, but it's shifted into another gear, and you tune in with the other.
Yes, but look, even Buddha made that statement, that there's only so much that human consciousness can know even after it's merged. And in the end, the essence of Buddha's teachings, if it comes down to one word, is suchness. What is suchness? Oh, let's go on. So, we can measure this dynamic, i.e. the soul, it's this dual desire nature, the interface between the past, the future, and the moment, and the birth chart. It comes back to the original question, why am I here, what are my lessons? Because again, those imply evolutionary intent. So the Pluto position in the natal chart, individually speaking, correlates to what the past has been for that particular individual. What kinds of desires have been in operation prior to this manifestation, to this life? What constitutes familiar memories and or experiences that the soul automatically gravitates to in this life? See, now you can speak about it even non-metaphysically, because the natal position of Pluto is now going to correlate to what psychologists call emotional complexes, and or in what you've learned about compulsions or obsessions, and or the nature of defensiveness and or vindictiveness. Or because what am I defending? In that defense, can I not be angry if that which is threatening my reality is making me feel threatened? What am I threatened about? So the point is that from a non-metaphysical point of view, the Pluto position correlates to the source of the deepest unconscious security in any of us. And unconscious is the very basis of what becomes the basis of complexes or compulsions or obsessions. Because they emanate motives or desire in which the very nature of it, you cannot understand its cause. You can't, it's emanating from an unconscious realm. You're aware of effect. As an example, what if I have Pluto in opposition Mars and we're dealing with somebody who has this pattern? Pluto opposition Mars and yet maybe trining Mercury. And let's say that this person has a compulsion, an overwhelming desire to experience sexual things that are outside the status quo, which we could now call sexual taboo. Pluto opposition Mars. And this person in their consciousness becomes aware of these desires coming into their consciousness, that they now feel Pluto compelled to follow. And yet they're trying out to Mercury, mentally they're going, I don't want to do this. And yet the nature of the compulsion is emotional, Pluto, and thus more powerful than the mental intent to override it. We're aware of the effect. Wherein lies the awareness of the cause. Do you see my point now? So sources of deepest unconscious security that we all gravitate to without even knowing it. It's most natural to the order and law and evolutionary station of the soul at this point in time, this life. And yet if relied upon, if the soul, the individual, the ego that has been created just stays there, then you have the observed phenomena of stagnation, and or now the word non-growth. The soul has stopped the evolutionary sequence. Thus you set up the basis of cataclysmic event. You see my point? So we can describe this phenomena for each of us. Each individual house position of Pluto describes this for each person. Where you have been, where you come in at, what you gravitate to, and yet simultaneously what the current evolutionary intent is in order to effect continuing evolution. That evolutionary intent is not in that natal position of Pluto. It is in the opposite house and sign. We are living in the land of cause, effect, and duality. Light, day, male, female, and all this. Polarities. So with respect to evolution, the polarity point reflects the evolutionary intent this time, which will occur with or without your conscious cooperation. Just as Nixon experienced Watergate, the polarity point for his 10th house Pluto, 4th house. He had to utterly generate and create an entirely different self-image, 4th house. And thus an entirely different experiences generating security. Something other than that 10th house Pluto, i.e. career, president. Now he was himself, did he not make the statement, I am president, and in one of his famous lying speeches. What is implied there? That the I structure, the ego structure, is utterly integrated to the social function. 10th house. To the extent that the sense of self-concept and security, familiarity, self-consistency, is now Pluto overly identified with it, overly invested, Pluto, to the extent that personal evolutionary growth is denied. So what is the polarity point here? He had to learn how to see himself without social position. You see my point? I mean, clearly the phenomenon of Watergate would have driven him deeply in on himself, no? Which would have to examine the nature of who he is, and thus hopefully reformulate himself. Guess who has South Node in Scorpio? Your friend Ronnie. And guess when Iran Gate happened? Pluto transit. And guess where that South Node is? Me and Jansky did I realize this chart is quite controversial, but me and Jansky, when he was still alive, we did a rectification thing, and we came up with 4-degree Sagittarius rising, which makes a 3rd house Aquarius Sun, and the South Node's in the 12th house in Scorpio. Now, all of you have heard in the papers or read in the papers the Teflon president. Does this not describe a South Node in Scorpio in the 12th house? But my point, look at the nature of Iran Gate. You see, what was the basis of it? Was it not a covert something or other? Was it not based on illusions and delusions and lies? And this is a way to validate these things. Most of you have read in papers that Reagan's, one of his main criticisms is that he's not aware of details. He could care less. Well, his North Node's in the 6th house. A lesson. It also reflects the lesson of humility. Well, Pluto comes along, guess what happens? So anyway, the current evolutionary intent is described by opposite house and sign for all of us. And it will happen with or without your cooperation. The water will return to the sea. Obviously, if you are developing awareness of what you're trying to accomplish and you cooperate with it, then you can hopefully minimize any potential cataclysmic event, unless it is karmically determined relative to prior action. And this is the basis of what you now call fate. From a generational point of view, obviously millions of people are going to have Pluto in the same sign. Pluto, Leo, Pluto, Virgo, etc. What you're looking at here is that it takes a whole bunch of people to effect the planetary evolutionary needs. No one person can do it for the planet, unless you're a highfalutin type. So an example, keeping in mind the law of polarity. A bunch of us in the room here have Pluto and Leo. So, as a generation, all of our individual souls in that generational grouping orientate to this Leonian dynamic as a primary orientation, i.e. the emphasis upon creative self-actualization and a self-generating right to have the freedom to do so. Thank you. But it's not the polarity point for the generation. Aquarius. Is it any coincidence that as this generation comes into more and more positions of power, socially speaking, is it any coincidence between this fact and the fact that we're evolving into the Aquarian age? Is this synchronicity or coincidence? Similarly, Jesus himself, for those who remember, I am a Sagittarius like Rob, and we do have to have fun sometimes. This Pluto was in Virgo. He himself said that he was here to usher in a new age, now known as the Piscean age. Well, polarity point, Pisces. For him. Coincidence or synchronicity? You see my point here? So it takes a whole bunch of people to have Pluto in the same sign to effect the evolutionary necessities of planet. And so there is this generational linkage. It becomes the basis of what used to be called the generation gap, or whatever it used to be called. What was it called? Generation gap? Because a sign that follows another sign is going to be a natural irritant. Leos irritate Cancer. Virgos irritate Leo. So on. You see the point here? So, now, this polarity point for the individual is in the opposite house and sign. Let's take a real quick example to illustrate. Let's say a person in question, this person X, let's say that they have a 9th house Pluto. And let's say for many lifetimes they've been asking big giant questions. Why life? Why death? What does it all mean? And they're, in a sense, trying to understand their sense of individuality in a cosmological context. 9th house Pluto, that's the basis of questions. And let's say for many lifetimes, over generating many experiences, asking many questions, they've arrived at a comfortable, Pluto, cosmological order of reality. A way to explain it. That now allows them to see themselves cosmologically. If that now, in coming into this life, feels comfortable, is not a natural, 9th house, is not that person going to gravitate to it? Yes or no? Yes. And yet, if they rely just on that orientation, so we have a polarity point, 3rd house. So what are we saying here? Is it not possible for that soul, read computer, to program a life in which, by its very nature of its program, it's going to generate or create circumstances that attract people to it that are more philosophically, intellectually powerful than itself, thus generating philosophical, intellectual confrontation, Pluto. Does not the basis of confrontation become the vehicle that allows the opportunity to expand, 3rd house, beyond the prevailing philosophical, cosmological orientation, and thus to add on? You see my point here? To become ever more aware of the whole truth, not a narrow view. And thus we have a rebirthing of that natal 9th house Pluto. It becomes a bit less defensive relative to what it's trying to prove. You understand the point now? If you just take this simple little law and apply it to your own individual chart, just that little piece of it, you will see this truth, whether you like to or not. Because don't you see the sequence between God, soul, ego? It's the Trinity. It's a perfect natural law. Now, Pluto does have a relationship with the nodal axis, the south and north node of the moon. Because most of you have learned in your traditional book that moon also correlates with security and emotion and familiarity and self-consistency, thus the past. It does correlate to your a very conscious component within your consciousness. In our view, it correlates to the ego itself. The moon does. You know, some of your traditional books say sun correlates to ego. If that's true, it's constant. The fact is that your self-image, your ego, is always changing. Is it not true? So perhaps a more perfect astrological correlation would be the moon rather than the sun. Now, with respect to the south node of the moon, in relation to natal Pluto, this specifically correlates to what we call a mode of operation and or action that has allowed the prior life evolutionary desires of the Pluto, the soul, to manifest, to take place, to occur. For an example, coming back to the 9th house Pluto, let's say the south node is in the 7th house. And coming back to this basic concept of a mode of operation, would it not be obvious now that as a mode of operation, the individual initiated 7th house cardinal, initiated a diversity cardinal of relationship, 7th house, with teacher types, 9th house Pluto, that had a whole bunch of information, 9th house, that reflected its own desire to know itself in a cosmological reality, thus being dependent and or orientated to initiating relationships in order to collect that information, to gather it, to complete itself in this way. You see this equation? And coming into this life, would not that person tend to do so? Let's contrast this with the 9th house Pluto, same 9th house Pluto, and put the south node in the 1st house. The same desires, 9th house Pluto, are going to be in place. The same nature, the same desire, the same reason. But now let's put the south node in the 1st house. Which was that individual's mode of operation? Were they initiating relationships? Were they dependent on them? Or were they going to be instinctually gravitating to their own independence to generate whatever experiences that they themselves generated with respect to that desire, and thus be dependent on themselves? Would it not be the simple difference between the person who is dependent on the teacher and the teacher? You see my point here? With the same 9th house Pluto, in that the modes of operation are diametrically opposed. So now can we say that every 9th house Pluto is the same? We can say it's the same relative to the desire nature, but in terms of how it actualizes such desire is determined by where that south node is. That has been the conscious area to make the desires of Pluto conscious. That occurs through south node. Moon. It is moon-ruled, conscious. It brings it from the depths to consciousness, ego. Again, if you just take your own case and just reflect on your case, you will see this truth. Now there is this polarity point. So if we deal with this 9th house Pluto, and now coming back to the south node and the 7th, are not the polarity points the 3rd house, and now relative to the nodal axis, the north node? In this case, the north node would be in the 1st house, would it not? The north node now describes their current life mode of operation that will allow the polarity point of Pluto to become conscious, thus actualized. In all cases. So if we have now the north node in the 1st house relative to the polarity point in the 3rd, is now clearly the message, the lesson, to break free from the dependency on relationship, to generate north node moon is moon rule, a security that is based on independence, that is discovered within itself, to learn how to ask and answer its own questions, not having those questions answered, i.e. dependent on someone else, Thus the individual evolving in such a way is to generate, evolve into its own philosophy that is determined through personal experience, and thus to inwardly confront the patterns of the past and externally to confront any individual who is trying to, Pluto, tell it what to think. North node, polarity point, third house. Thus evolving into an attitude. Well, fine, this is what you think, this is what I think. You see my point here? Conversely, with that north node in the 7th, south node in the 1st, polarity point still the same, is it not? This individual has a evolutionary intent or lesson to evolve into a consciousness that respects the diversity and all points of view. The lesson is called relativity. Polarity point 3rd, north node 7th house. You see my point here? And to open itself up, north node and 7th, to relationships as a generalized phenomenon, as well as a intimate phenomenon, meaning the person's going to be a natural loner. And thus they have this lesson of learning how to be in relationship as an equal, not a dominant other, not as the leader, not as the teacher, but a relationship in which both partners are equal and both are mutual teachers. And this accomplishing the polarity point, the relativity of truth, other people's truth. You see the point here? And coming all the way back to the beginning, that 9th house Pluto was the same. And just by showing the simple difference between the nodal axis, you can see how vastly different that person's experience is going to be. Is this making sense? Huh?
Are you relieved?
Absolutely. I'm still waking up, so of course I'm relieved. Okay.
Do you think Pluto's house position is the important, what you're really looking for in a chart? I mean, as far as the termination rather than the sign, so much, where it shows up what house?
From an individualized point of view, yes, the house. And then with respect to generational considerations and what I come in with, the wave, if you will, the wave that I come in with, that is just as important. Because that's constituting my generational background. People who at a core level, Pluto Leo, Pluto Virgo, they're structured, like me.
Plus personal aspects too.
Huh?
Plus the personal aspects.
Well, we haven't got to that yet, but... now there's another equation in this little formula that we need to look at. Because, let's say, each node, south or north, is going to be in a sign. And thus it's going to be ruled by a planet. The planetary ruler of the south node, by house and sign, has operated prior to this life. It's what we call a facilitator. Has operated to facilitate the experiences that are reflected in a south node. In other words, the south node is operated to make the desired nature of Pluto conscious, and the planetary ruler of that node facilitates that awareness, that experience. It correlates to additional experiences that allow that south node to operate, which in turn allow the Pluto to have been manifest. This example, 9th house Pluto, south node, 7th house, planetary ruler in the 4th. Would it not, this is just a possible scenario, would it not be possible for that person to have gravitated to their parents as a primary source of information relative to philosophical, cosmological questions? Yes or no? and that their sense of security and self-image and identity is linked with their parental belief structure. A facilitator, additional information, again reflecting the law of the Trinity, because the North Node is going to have a planetary ruler too. And it's going to operate to facilitate the North Node. So you have the law of the Trinity doubled to equal 6. The chakras. And thus the law of duality. Truth must reflect natural order. Yeah.
What if the ruler of your North Node is Pluto?
Just hang on, we'll get to it. There are exceptions to all these happy rules.
If you have an aspect coming up to the ruler of your North and South Node, is that going to kick in?
We'll get to that. Who's been kind enough to be making me all these coffees? That's great. Thank you. Just no. Look, thank you very much. Quite kind. Now again, you can address these issues or look at these issues non-metaphysically, because not every client coming in your door is going to be concerned with karma. Not every client's going to be coming in, why am I here? What are my lessons? Some may be crawling in the door. No. Why am I repeating this all the time? Why does this keep happening to me all the time? They've reached a point in time where they're sick of a certain kind of experience that keeps happening. They're tired of having their nose rubbed in it. Well, we revert to the non-metaphysical view. And we simply drop into these, looking at it from the point of view of the sources of deepest unconscious security that generate compulsions or obsessions, or various kinds of emotional addictions, or patterns in behavior that are simply comfortable, which are dictating the repeating of the experience. I mean, if let's say I have Pluto opposition my Venus, if I keep attracting a partner who's trying to rub my nose in it all the time, trying to penetrate my psychology and my emotions, trying to tinker with how I think, all the time, opposition. Can I not perceive that as an opposing force to me? Yes or no? And could it not set in motion these very deep alterations of emotional reaction to that partner, called now attraction repulsion? Could it not generate these cycles of being completely united and completely apart? Could I not myself be pushing my partner's buttons? Oh, no, no. Not me. Me? And so the person finally gets sick of it. You see my point here? We don't have to talk to them about life to life or any of these things. We just now offer them strategies to accomplish change, which are now reflected in the polarity points, etc., etc. Your strategies that you're recommending reflecting these points. And all your attitude now is, try this. You've got nothing to lose. Check it out. See what happens. Do you see this point?
So you use the polarity point of Pluto and the facilitator of that polarity point as the...
The facilitator is the planetary ruler of the North Node. Yes.
Design strategies.
Yes, the planetary ruler is not the facilitator. Is not the ruler of the polarity sign of Pluto. The facilitator is the planet that is ruling the North Node in this case, or the South Node. Yes, yes. All the way in the back.
What if one of the nodes are in Scorpio, that would be the ruler in Scorpio, and you would be the ruler. Now, how do you determine that?
We're going to be getting to exceptions and our unique cases in a bit. Okay, now one thing we need to discuss at this point is the following empirical fact. That as we observe a society, let's take the one you're used to here, America, can we not make the following observation? That roughly 70 to 75% or thereabouts is in what we can call the consensus state, where their beliefs, their values, the lifestyles they generate are a reflection of the consensus state, the mainstream. Meaning if I'm in that state and the astronomer tells me astrology is bogus, if I'm in that state, this becomes my opinion. I conform. Can we make this observation, yes or no? No, it is roughly 70%. At this point in history. If it was not true, Reagan would not have been elected.
No, I'm saying it seems like it should be more like 80, maybe 90%.
Oh, it's not quite that high, thank God. Roughly 20% or thereabouts is in what we could call the individual state of evolution, where they have been evolving beyond or out of the consensus. In other words, if I find myself in an individual state, or what a Jungian psychologist would call the individuated state, then if an astronomer